In our last lesson, we learned about how to clean up data and make it look like database data by adding primary keys and normalizing it. Afterwards, you should have reviewed the invoice file here to see how I've restructured it, with the result being that the invoice itself no longer works. Specifying our data in such a way is merely our starting point, and before we do anything else with it, we need to create table objects out of it so that we can best utilize the data in its form. For reference, I've deleted all of the named ranges within this file so that we're starting more from scratch, as the named ranges can generate confusion when working with tables initially. Everything that follows would have worked with the named ranges in place. The video would just look a little bit differently. Creating data tables is very, very easy, so let's start with the client list. First, you're going to select the data that you want to create the table from, so I'm going to select A1 through J177. Then, on the Insert tab, I'm going to select the Table option towards the left of the ribbon. I'll be asked for the location of the data, which is my current selection, and whether my table has any headers. I could easily modify this range selection if I desired, but I've already selected the data that I'm interested in to make this as easy as possible. My table does have headers, which are simply my table labels, so I'll make sure that that box is checked and press OK. Upon pressing OK, a whole bunch of stuff happens. First, and most notably, the format changes. My table has alternating banded rows of blue and white. My ribbon has a new tab called Design under Table Tools, and my columns have resized. Additionally, all of my columns now have a filter drop-down for each entry. That's it though. We've created a data table. At first glance, there's nothing radically different aside from the formatting, but we've just added a whole host of benefits to our data set. So let's start with some of the quality of life benefits. If I scroll down and look for a value, let's say I want to find name 0055 and get the last order date. It's not too far down, it's here in row 56, but before I scroll down, I'd probably want to look at my column headers. So I've got A through J. Normally, I'd need to either freeze the panes on the very top row or write down that I'm interested in column I to get the last order. But if I just scroll down and find name 0055, I can now look at the top of my screen and see that my interface has actually changed. Instead of A through J, each column has the name of the table column that I'm in. So I can see that this is primary contact, and I can see that this is last order. On top of that, my filter is actually part of that very top component of my spreadsheet. It doesn't matter how far down I scroll either. As long as I have a cell selected within the table, I can see the column headers. If I select outside of the table, it goes back to the normal view. Column headers are nice, but not really a game changer. But since we're at the bottom of the table, let's look at how to handle data entry. I'm going to add a new entry, name 0177. As soon as I press enter, that whole row becomes part of my table. Of course, all of the other entries are still blank, so I'd have to fill them in, but this has an important impact. Let's say that I've just found out that our company wants to show the number of days between the contract date and the last order date. In other words, I want column I minus column J. I could go to the top and write a formula and copy it down, except I don't need to. Data tables apply formulas intelligently by column, so I can start here in K175, and I can use my normal formula entry, using my arrow key to navigate over to column I, except it shows at last order. Then I can add minus. I use my mouse to click on column J, and I get at contract date. This syntax is a little different. It's not I minus J, it's last order minus contract date. This indicates that the formula should use the value from that named column that resides in the current row. So my formula literally reads as last order minus contract date, and I can press enter. Upon pressing enter, a whole new column has been added to my table, and the formula fills in every row, even in row 178, where I have no other data. So let's go ahead and add another row to my table, name 0178. Upon adding that name, the new row is added to the table, and the formula automatically copies itself down. No longer do you have to go column by column looking for formulas to copy down where new data is added. It's already done for you. But not only that, it makes it additionally clear where manual data entry is necessary by leaving those entries blank. That's pretty useful, but yet we still only scratched the surface. Now let's go look at our new formula again. It uses the @ sign and the column name. So let's go back to the top of our table. Let's rename column K as days counted. Something simple, straightforward, easy to remember. Let's go a couple formulas over so we don't add a new column to the table. Let's write a formula. Let's say that I wanted to count the number of contracts that I have. So I'm going to use equals count A, and I'm going to select the entirety of column H, the primary contact. When I select it, instead of getting H2 to H179, I get what looks like a named range that reads table 1, bracket, primary contact, close bracket. Each column within the table is a dynamic named range that can be accessed by the table name followed by the column name, which is pretty cool in and of itself. So I can press enter and finalize the formula. But now, somebody comes along and doesn't like the name primary contact for that column name, or table 1 as the table name. So first, they change primary contact to main contact. What does that do to our formula? That probably broke it, right? Well, no. If I select my formula, I can see that magically, it's updated primary contact to read main contact. And so, it still works. Now, as for our table name, if we select the table, go to the Design under Table Tools, we can change the table name under the properties here. I'm going to call it Client List. After making this change, I can again select my formula and look at it to see that it smartly updated the reference from Table 1 to Client List. I can even add a few more names at the bottom of the table to extend it. So right now I have 178. I'll add A, B, C, and D, go back to the top, and my count's updated to 182 because I've added 4 values to my main contact. So it is a dynamic range that updates as the table expands and contracts. Let's look at the Design tab now. First, tables are compatible with slicers, which we'll cover later, and they can be directly assigned as sources to pivot tables from the ribbon using the Summarize with Pivot table. Additionally, you can use the Remove Duplicates directly in there and import and export data, but that's going a little bit beyond the scope of this course. But finally, let's get to these table style options. Most of these options simply modify the visual appeal of the table, from adding or removing banding for both rows and columns, to adding formatting for the last columns and first columns, to even including additional features such as a header row, a total row, and a filter button, which all modify the actual functionality of the table somewhat. The filter button simply enables and disables the filter option. But let's consider the header row now. If we uncheck the header row, we lose the column header functionality when we scroll down, but our columns still remember and retain those names, so our formulas, like this main contact count, still work. To assign the names, though, you simply have to recheck the header row and enter them. Additionally, formulas can actually reference the header row specifically and use the hashtag header value to do so. So here in column O, I can set this equal to H1, which actually reads client list, pound headers, comma, main contact. Then if we change main contact back to primary contact, our formula updates in the same way. This means to pull the header value from primary contact. Finally, the totals row option works almost identically to the header row in kind of a reverse approach. The totals row adds a line to the end of the table, and each item can be customized by dropdown. So here in the primary contact, I could select the dropdown and choose the count function to see that there are 182. Now selecting the dropdown simply inputs the appropriate formula, so you can actually write custom formulas for determining your totals. So for example, I could change this subtotal manually to say subtotal 9, which would be a sum. This total row has its own hashtag reference, so I'm going to change this dropdown back to the count. And I'm going to go back up here to the top. So here in column O, rather than using this count A, I could say equal to, and I'm going to go down to the bottom of my table, and upon selecting the totals row, my formula updates to be pound totals, primary contact, just like the pound headers, except now I'm referencing the totals row. My formula now shows that I'm referencing the totals row, and I've got one showing the headers, so I can easily create summaries of tables that reference totals without ever using formulas and only pointing to a simple reference. As you can see, organizing data into data tables adds a ton of different flexible features that can be very useful on their own, but the tables will truly become powerful once we've incorporated them into the Excel data model to relate them to one another. But that'll have to wait till the next lesson. For now, you can download this invoice file where I've converted each of the worksheets to tables and given them names for reference.